check on something like this from here. Now that he has fallen.
Where are they? They are coming. Come on. Senegal? Senegal?
Here comes Senegal, please. Let's put our hands together for them as we wait for Team Nigeria. Team Nigeria. Aban, we are waiting for you. Where are the dimensions of Garden Wisdom Schools? Team Nigeria, please, we are waiting for you. Nigeria, we are waiting for you. Now, to everyone, I will urge you know what you're doing at this time. It's the last finals, and therefore, I welcome each and every one of you. But please pay attention, observe the rules until these presentations are done. Just a reminder, after this, as the judges go for deliberation, we're going to have like only 2 speeches, and then we wait for the announcement of the results, and then we go home. Only 3 steps until we are home. First, after this, judges will go and deliberate. As they do that, we are going to have a few speeches. If they all return, we are going to have the results and award ceremony. Thank you very much for being patient. Thank you very much for choosing to be with Join the Great Society. Over to the chair.
Come in. Okay, thank you very much. Hello.
please. Welcome to the final round of Plan People Schools Debate Championship. My name is Ram for Leicester Abroad. I'll be your chair for this round. I've been the chief educator. It's been a very amazing tournament. Congratulations to gentlemen, both teams, for making it to the final. And I wish you all the best for this final round. You have sight already, right? Don't. Send your luckiest person. Right, come on. Someone has to be the lucky person on the team. This one, tell us what you picked. Okay. In proposition, Elite High School. In opposition, Darling Wisdom, Pentagon. May the best team win. Oh, time is 6 minutes, please. And 3 minutes of replies, please. Okay.
Alright, the motion classification. Here the motion reads: this House would subject all government policies into youth impact assessment.
Motion, please listen, and then you confirm if this is the motion that you have. The motion for the final is: this House would subject all government policies to a youth impact assessment. Do we have that motion? We have the same motion? Okay.
First of all, I want to thank everybody who's taken their time to be here today at this very tournament and these very finals of the JSTC 2025. So this is Margaret. He has been participating with us from first round up to now, and he will be speaking with us today. He's our team mascot. Team Senegal, Abbas Jock, and Garang. And for all states, if you are silent and at least to make it much engaging, you should stand up. With that, so that must speak in 3, 2, come on. Panel, we all know young people are the majority in every country. If there's a possibility that something happens in the country that affects them the most. And for that reason, we subject all policies or all government policies to a youth impact assessment. Couple of things in my speech. I will give you clarity on the motion. I will give you why we think this youth impact assessment are much important this way, but then lastly to my argument. Then first the motion practically. What are government policies first of all? These are official decisions, plans of action taken by a government to address issues, guide society, and manage the country. Notice they are basically the rules, strategies, and directions that determine how the government runs things like the economy, health, education, and sometimes environment. What does it look like then? First, they look like economic policies. These are policies that manage money, resources, and sometimes the tax of the government. But then also social policies that aim at promoting well-being of people in their nation. But then also foreign policies that can go as interact with other countries and that's all. And also environmental policies protecting nature and sometimes managing the policies. Notice here that goes as far as defense and security policies that actually go to look at how people are secure within a nation. Notice that they look like a bunch of things. First, constitutional policies or articles. These are actually things that are written down actually to protect every kind of a country. But then also laws, acts passed by the parliament and also government white papers or strategic plans. And then also regulations issues on the ministries. But then lastly, budget that allocate money to every kind of action, right? Check. What do you think the impact of this particular youth assessment look like? Like first, is on the youth interest like youth interest mystery, right? Just feel like these are actually centered around the youth mystery and how they actually react to other things, right? But then be intergenerational justice, as to say, how these policies are less short term and sometimes more short term, right? They're able to see how they can affect people from the present and how they can affect people from the future, and that is actually affect impact will get this. But then also increase accountability and transparency. What we think these particular policies actually increase accountability because these young people are the people that count ahead of the future and that people that count from the childhood make these people that are able to look at what things they do if they assess a particular policy. But then also goes on better youth outcome, right? Because these young people, if they're able to assess a particular youth assessment, they're able to show you how better outcome in the future because they become the other people in the future, right? But then here, youth impact assessment would look like, or how it would look like in account of a model as three proposition. But then first, it's a systemic process. Like to look at what youth assessment is of, just a systemic process of evaluating how proposed or maybe some existing policies are evaluated, and before they are passed, they actually drop down for you to see how best it could affect them and how best it could actually affect other people, right? Notice here, this answers the question of how does this policy means and how does it work both now and in the future. First is that a couple of things in our account of model that makes it much easier. First is on the policy description, what government want to do and how important for young people to engage with it. But then B is on the youth profile, right? Who are people that are being affected, the age, the group, and sometimes the root, right? It emphasis on all impact, that things do like the education, things do like the employment, the health, and sometimes participation, and lastly, the security, right? These things actually affect the young people, and by assessing, by giving these particular young people the access to this, they're able to influence and show us how best they could be within that particular district, right? But then also here, there are legal framework that are required in this district. Passing a law and regulation, making YIA, or let's just say youth impact assessment, much mandatory to all the ministries, right? Going aside, before they actually are proposed, before they're implemented, they have made sure that these young people assess and they're able to show us their interest. It goes as far as standardizing the format. So every kind of YIA, some sort of young youth impact assessment becomes a little bit implemented by all the ministries within that measure. Right? We just have a simple like minister of youth that have become the body that actually implement these particular processes or making sure that young people assess these particular policies that are made by the government. Right? What is the fundamental reason for this particular youth impact assessment? First, to make sure that the majority of people within the country that are affected the most by this particular policy have the ability to assess and they're able to see how much they influence and actually the thing affect. But also to identify the positive and the negative consequences of both policies before they're actually implemented or actually proposed to the entire country. But then lastly, to provide a recommendation from the youth because if you know properly, young people are in the middle, right? They are the younger people, and besides that, the people who will come in the future. By making sure that they assess this particular policy, give us the room and how best we can actually evaluate the policies that actually affect everyone within the nation, right? But then how do you think this thing would look?
like, oh, maybe this issue of youth assessment. For advisory growth of youth council, like the individuals that actually are head of young people are able to assess this particular thing. It might not look like random people, like everybody in the street, we just come and look at them. The advisory board of youth becomes the main people actually to assess this particular thing, but then also the representative of every kind of young person within the country become the best people to go as far as looking into this particular nature of it. But what is the mechanism of youth impact? What is actually important for us to implement this particular youth impact assessment? Right? First, supported by a strong political committee, like if country has a particular committee that makes it more easier to assess, but then also adequate resources, like countries should have actually stability on their own resources to make sure that this particular policy can be implemented. But then lastly, effective institutional mechanism that country have this institutional mechanism that is effectively able to engage the young people with a certain particular policy. Right? That's the argument. Then. How youth or maybe young people that are affected the most should be liberated from this particular incident. Right? Because here, look here, we just feel like every kind of impact that may come with all in opposition might be seen as an impact, but here it actually affects young people, all the youth that are in the middle because they're the focal point in this debate. So we just feel like by giving them access to this policy, it makes it easier for them to even evaluate the future because one day they will come in the future, and also to make it easier because that thing came from the behind part of the young people, so that they're able to evaluate any policy that can affect the whole country. Like making it so simple in this debate for us to assess, to give the young people the access, it makes it simple for us to see the policies that are effective and that are much important to the whole country. That makes me so proud to propose this debate. Thank you very much.
Okay, I thank everyone for having made it up this far. It's really something too incredible. So, for those that don't know me, I'm Paul Awol, and I just need total silence, especially those that are behind, as we enjoy this debate. So, in case of pure eyes that the proposition wants to raise, in case of pure eyes that the proposition wants to raise, you can just raise your hands, or you can just stand up, but please don't produce any noise because this might be disruptive. So, if that is the case and everything is said, then I will start my speech in 3, in 2, and in 1. Cheer. I feel like in this debate, both sides will believe that one, these particular youth are people that are being silenced, right? These particular individuals, these particular youth are people that show the needs that to be represented, right? These are people that need actually policies that positively impact them. But then what we go against in this debate is on the idea of making the entire policies of the government to actually be based on youth, right? Why? Because firstly we tell you that a country is actually characterized by different particular individuals, right? Of which we have the young people, we have the elders, and we have the youth. In becomes more bad when team proposition says that the reason why they want to make that is because youth are the majority. Even if like youth are the majority, it is not necessarily good to like just put the entire government policies on the youth, which I'll be able to show you why it is bad, right? Firstly, let's start by looking on the nature of actually what these policies look like. One is on the complexity of how these policies truly look like, right? I feel like most government policies are policies that are too complex. These are policies that need critical thinking, right? Today the policies might look like they're affecting youth, but then tomorrow they might look like they're affecting other people, right? Now why this is important? In proposition characterization, they don't show us actually how youth look like, right? Let us first try showing you how this youth look like. One, these youth are actually characterized by things like rationalization, right? They would always want to like resist whatever thing comes in their place, right? This becomes more problematic because if then all the policies are actually subjected to such rationalized people, we are likely to get more harms. What do I mean to try what do I try to say by this, right? I feel like from side of opposition, there are some policies that might lessly affect the youth, but in the long term run, that might lessly affect the youth. But there are some policies that highly affect the youth, right? But in the event that the team opposition just generalizes all these particular policies to affect the youth, it becomes more bad. Why do I say so, right? A quick example is on how it's in South Sudan, right? Recently when they were constructing actually a dam in South Sudan, what happened, right? The youth when they wanted to construct a dam, the youth actually complained that dams have to be constructed. What did the government do? The government said no, they shouldn't be constructed because if it is constructed, it's going to create a sense of tension between South Sudan and then Egypt, right? This then shows you that the youth actually, because of their rationalization, they don't look outside the box. Now it becomes more problematic inside of team proposition because if we subject all these policies in the youth impact assessments, then this dam would have been constructed, right? It becomes more bad because at the end of the day, in the long term run, we realize that there will be actually a sense of tension in between. That is the first reason to show you why it actually affects, why actually team proposition gets to be affected, right? But even secondly, it's on the idea that there is diversity in the country, right? We tell you that not whatever policy has to actually benefit the youth. Because at the point in time, we will realize that the elders need to be benefited, right? Things like pension that exist in the current status quo. It is more better for actually these elders to like be given pension, right? What do I try to explain by this, right? A pension is actually, okay, this is actually a retirement fee that is given when elders actually leave the job. This pension becomes more important because if it is given to these particular elders, they are like able to sustain their property, they are able to sustain their lives and something of that if they actually leave jobs, right? Now inside proposition, in the event like they generalize all these political in the event that they generalize all these policies into youth impact assessment, then they ignore things like pension, right? This becomes more problematic because in the long term run we realize that these elders that are actually retiring, you are not able to like get this pension. I like the distinction to show you why team opposition actually does not stand, right? Now why this mechanization comes opposition case. We realize that in opposition case they cater for only one group of people. But then we tell you that catering only for one this group of people is bad because at the end of the day the policy is set to like actually benefit whatever person that exists in the current status quo, right? Now what do we propose as team opposition? We propose an idea whereby we only have youth impact assessment. This is to say that we don't actually generalize it by saying that it should be all government policies, right? This means that if there are policies that need to actually grab the attention of the youth, right? Maybe policies like education, then we go with it as government, right? But then we believe that there are also other policies that actually maybe might actually affect not the youth but affect other particular people. So we also see those policies, right? We show the policies like pension, we see those particular policies and then we work for them. Here we actually ensure inclusivity. How? Because here we don't only cater for youth, but we cater for the entire. We cater for like the entire system, right? Then the distinction to show you, to show why team opposition actually differs from team proposition, right? I feel like even the entire benefits that team proposition wants to like propose, they even come inside opposition, right? Because proposition tells you that the reason why they think they want to have this policy in place is because one, they want to make sure that the majority are actually represented. In our side, we even represent the majorities. Why? Because we tell you, we believe that these youth actually need these youth are actually not being represented, right? These youth actually, there are policies that are proceeded, that are harm this youth. But then we tell you, even if those policies exist, there are also some policies that should actually benefit others, right? So what do we tell you inside hope? We tell you we want to actually cater for all those particular things. This is to say that the policies that come from like the policies that actually affect the majority, which they claim for, we even cater for them, right? Which policies are these? Like policies like education, we care for those particular policies in our side. But we will tell you, apart from only youth impact assessment, there are also other most important things that we should actually involve ourselves in, and that is how in our side I think like we better win side proposition. Because here we deal with diversity, not only focusing on youth impact assessment policies, right? Now dive into our constructive points of arguments, right? Firstly, it's on the impact. Firstly, it's on representation. I feel like inside opposition is where we do have representation. How do we have representation here, right? We tell you that the policies are set to like actually benefit the entire countries. So what do? We actually ensure we actually ensure that the policies that are set actually fit the entire capacity in the country. Why is this true, right? We take an example in what happened in Germany 2017, when Germany actually invested much more in pension, right? What happened is that the youth were actually like, why do you invest in pension? This is something that is not even like related to what we are related to, like our benefit, right? So what happened? The youth, the government ignored that, and in the long term run, we realized that there was actually much more impact that happened in Germany, right? Because in the long term run, we realized that the elders actually in Germany were able to like really sustain their life. So in the process that team proposition only like tries to subject all these particular policies into things like youth impact assessments, this wouldn't have happened, and that is why team proposition actually differs from team proposition. With all this being said, I'm so proud to propose. Okay, before I start my speech, I would just like to take a precise moment to appreciate my teammates, my coach, and my opponents as well, everybody that has made this debate so colorful. Thank you very much. We've really had a nice debate for this tournament. My name is Doc, and I'll be taking second prop today. My PI preferences do not budge my speech, but if you don't feel obligated to that either ways, you can just budge my speech, but make sure you are in a low tone. In all the account of that, I'm going to start my speech. And 3, 2, and 1. See, look panel, the case that team opposition runs is one that tells you that we have a good number of problems existing within the society that do not inherently affect you. Even if they don't get a clear analogy as to why these things always indirectly affect you, even if we don't see the manifest of these particular problems currently within the status quo, within in the long-term run, we're able to show you why these things will inherently always exist within the status quo. I'll be able to show you that principally within my speech. But first, as what I'll be doing within this speech, I'll be giving you motion clarities, but secondly, I'll be making extensive responses to the cases that we get from Team Up, and then lastly and most importantly, my point of argument on how we best achieve intergenerational justice. Now first is on clarities in this debate. Now I'm going to show you one thing regarding the clarity. Look at the supplementary nature of our case, because we tell you that when we have this youth impact assessment, it doesn't necessarily mean that we leave out the old people. It doesn't necessarily mean that we leave out the young people, because these are things that can always exist within the stages quo. They can still have those assessments, but what we propose is a youth assessment regarding all the issues that affect youth, whether directly or indirectly. The complete denial from them that we get is that, hey, look, these things are not issues that affect youth in most cases directly or indirectly. I'll be able to show you, even if by extension they indirectly affect youth, the youth are still explicitly affected within the status quo, both currently and even in the future. But first, on responses. Now first, we get the idea of youth being silenced by team opposition, of saying that, hey, look, the youth are silent, these are things that exist within the status quo. While they inherently accord to that, we show them why this thing is not likely, or why their voices are not heard out at the end of the day. Look at the case of Nasser, and look at the case of what is happening in Nasser. Even if the government of South Sudan is a legitimate body that has the ability or has the power to do such a thing of bombarding that country, it still doesn't inherently say that the youth are not affected. Security might not be a policy that directly affects youth, but we think in the long term run, it indirectly affects youth. Look at that bombardment, the impact of that bombardment on youth, and the collateral damage that resulted at the end of the day. It is a policy that we're not willing to stand for, because if youth had the ability to assess the nature of this policy, it was not going to come at the end of the day. But secondly, when they tell us that this debate isn't about entire policies, right? We're able to show you one. When it comes to entire policies, they always affect you, whether directly and indirectly. Look at pensions at the end of the day. Why pensions are made is, at the age at which you retire, and how you are able to get the funds when you retire. We still have these youth at the working class at the end of the day. So they need to know what age they are going to retire, but again, be able to know how, what amount of money they are going to make by the time they retire, and how they are supported within the status quo. We're able to show you one. The vast majority of these old people are individuals who have retired at the end of the day. So these policies do not inherently bring them back to the status quo, but moreover, we think the youth exists as a binding between the young people and the elderly, because we show you even children at the end of the day whose policies are not supposed to be engaged by youth in their world are still parented by these individuals. But moreover, the representation of these individuals is still carried out by youth. That's why we have the vast majority of organizations being run by youth who are able to advocate for the elderly, but moreover for the young people, right? But secondly, is on the idea of telling us, hey, look, majority is what we're looking at in this debate. Look, guys, on the idea of having a majority of people, right? I'll take you shortly. On the idea of having a majority of people, we're able to show you why this is not the fundamental reason. We just feel like youth are underrepresented. But for the fact that they are the majority of people, we still think that it's quite important for us to represent them, because these old people already exist within these political systems in most instances. So they always have power, they always have resources, but the youths are still sidelined at the end of the day. By extension, when you tell us we prioritize only, I'll take it shortly, we prioritize or we work on things such as economic policies, or more specifically health policies, we are able to leave out things such as security policies or the pensions that are able to affect youth even in the long run at the end of the day, right? But that is what they tell us about the complex nature of these policies. Look, the government has the responsibility to explicitly express the nature of their policies to these individuals that exist and their legal systems, right? The government has the responsibility of making sure the citizens understand the nature of their policy. So when you tell us that the youth are not going to understand this policy, it clearly does not tell me why a youth who is having 34 years will most probably not understand the policy that the government has brought up, right? But then again, it's on the idea of policies that lessly affect you. We think this is a diminishing analogy, because even within the status quo currently, we can make a foreign trade agreement, even if we don't even if we don't actively affect youth. We think in the long run, when we are going to have high concentration of these foreign policies within the country, it's most likely that we're able to affect how these youth work. So we show you how these policies that you don't think are important in your world are able to influence those policies that are important. Because when it comes to pensions, it clearly shows the stability of a youth by the time they grow old, because they should engage on how these policies are made, because they are quite sure by the time they retire, it's quite imminent for them to retire at the end of the day. It's very important. So when they retire, they should know what nature of policy is able to regard them under that caliber. But again, when they tell us about the representation of majorities and how they best represent majorities, right? We're able to show you one, we still have these older individuals existing within political systems, right? You don't clearly tell us how you're able to represent this youth even on those policies that you think are not most important to you as you claim them to be, right? But on to my argument on how we achieve intergenerational justice. Abbas tells you three things regarding this argument. One, the fundamental reasons of this YIA. One, to make sure youth, often the largest part of the population, are not ignored. But most importantly, to identify positive and negative influence. Look at democracy does not work if 70% of the population is excluded on how decisions are made at the end of the day, right? We're able to show you, even in your case scenario, when you tell us that these things are not important, they still affect youth in the long run, so they still have the voice for them to take part in it, right? You don't tell us what is the bad part with them participating in this thing, right? Look at intergenerational justice, right? We can make a policy now regarding foreign economic policies or even security policies that you claim not to be much important, but international defense system. We're able to show you in the long run, these are quite important, because these foreign policies still influence how these youth are able to establish entrepreneurship careers at the end of the day, because when they don't have these stable economies, it's most likely that you don't account for them. Team opposition here does not tell us the clear analogy as why they think it's inherently bad for us to still have these things be like the youth still engaging, because we are able to show you that these things that you see not to be important, they still indirectly affect youth, but this indirect effect is still an effect. We're able to win this one.
everything is set, then I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Sure. I thought we already agreed to the extent that we say that youth representation into all these kind of issues is something that's likely very important, because firstly we just do agree that this particular kind of youth actually are the majority, and most of the time are the ones that are affected by this particular kind of policies. We do not say that we do not want this kind of assessment to occur. We just tell you that it is very unreasonable to be able to give all, to subject all these government policies to go under this kind of youth impact assessment, right? Because what does this mean in the debate? It just means that there are some policies that are actually too unnecessary to actually be put to this particular kind of issue. So why is that? Why is that true? We just think that, look, there are policies that need urgency, right? Because these kind of policies need to go through some level of prioritization for the state to be able to look at what is very important currently right now, right? The problem with them passing such policies into a youth impact assessment is how that particular policies are then going to be looked at a different way by this kind of youth at the end of the day. What do these things then look like? I just think for example, with international relations, the way that they oversimplify this to actually be important to pass it through things like youth impact assessment is something that likely oversimplified, right? Because here the real deal. For example, it's about how we actually relate with other countries. That means that the way that this particular kind of, for example, United States of America wants to relate with countries like Uganda, but to some extent Uganda feels like the United States is one of their most important people within their economy, maybe in support of things like humanitarian aid, or maybe other kind of support they give them, right? They need to prioritize those things, because those are the things that actually look at how the society looks behaves in terms of how support is given. The problem now becomes when you now feel for example, the United States want to maintain this, so they want Uganda to also implement things like LGBTQ rights. At this aspect, when you now want to pass such a policy to the public, right? The general public then looks to their head of advisory head of youth, right? It becomes too much that this particular kind of people at the end of the day are going to look at this as a very bad policy to them. Maybe they rationally do not want that kind of LGBTQ rights at the end of the day. Now, to the extent you prioritize those decisions of that, you then fail to then look at the impact of what this particular thing is going to cause, because the United States now want to remove all this support, and then that kind of relationship refuses to work because you prioritize those people at the end of the day. That is how complex these things begin to come at the end of the day, right? What do we get that from side proposal? They tell you that, look here, there's a problem that some policies indirectly affect the youth, right? Because what I will tell you is that there are some policies that we look at policies that directly affect the youth, and then we prioritize them entirely, because such policies like environmental issues have to be prioritized at the end of the day, right? So we think that those things are going to affect the youth. Things like on economics, whereby we need to prioritize whether these people are employed or whether they are not employed. But they also tell you, but also there are some that actually indirectly affect the youth. For example, security, right? When the kind of security we tell you on our side is where to prioritize things like military procurement, right? To make sure we look at those kind of activities, like the kind of military that actually brought in. But they don't brought to us the idea of security in Nasir. They say that the problem with such security in Nasir is that people are for example, that compartment indirectly affected the youth. Sure, we just think that is not the idea that comes from us. The idea that comes from us is that to some extent, it becomes unnecessary, for example, for a state to just try to prioritize those kind of military procurement to make sure that some of those things get to us at the end of the day. Secondly, is they say also, because we tell you that we also have things like pensions, right? It becomes unnecessary also for these particular things to pass through those kind of ideas, because at the end of the day, pensions are things that are on the old age or the old people. They say no, but also they indirectly affect the youth, because you have to think about what the kind of pension they will receive in the future. But those are not the perspective here. We're just saying that economic inequality. No, we just say that the way that we prioritize economics here, right? Maybe for example, if you are satisfied in that field, it means that they are not going to look at that kind of economic they are not not going to look at the idea of pensions that would actually occur at the end of the day, right? They also tell you that also because we tell you what is the biggest push from our side. We tell you that it is better to be selective of policies, right? And then be like to leave out others that become complex and that might actually make you to rationalize them and make sure that they get outside of those particular kind of things at the end of the day. But they tell you that being selective of some policies, leave out others, right? We tell you the things that we leave out are just those policies that do not affect the youth in the long run, right? Those are the kind of policies we actually leave out, but not those ones that directly address, bring problems to them in the long run at the end of the day, like on climate change, right? Those are those kind of aspect, right? So firstly, then what is the argument? They say that firstly, we're going to achieve intergenerational injustice. We just think that the response to this is simple. We think this is a reversibility of injustice at the end of the day. Because what is the point of that particular, what do you say that you are going to achieve intergenerational justice if those particular kind of ideas at the end of the day, of those particular kind of youth are going to affect how these particular kind of policies affect everybody else? Because what is the nature of a state sovereignty, state sovereignty? Is one that has children, is one that actually have elderly, is the one that actually have the youth themselves. So you have to prioritize all of them, but you only have to look at how some particular policies are going to affect this particular youth at some point in time, right? So it becomes very good for on our side when we tell you be selective, because youth are rationalized, right? They can just protest against, but they can just resist against some kind of other policies. At the end of the day, that becomes very bad. We are so proud to have proposed. Thank you.
Just a minute. Idea. The light pen.
It's okay. We're fine. Give it.
Just a minute. Okay, thank you. First, POI in silence, and I'm going to take time. My name is Nicodemus, third speaker, Senegal. So bring the phone, Okay, so for that, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Shall notice how opposition loses this debate on the nature of how they view how youth are going to be exclusive to people such as the old one and those who are younger, right? We're able to show in our two speeches that first, when you talk about this youth, we have people that are above 30 from 34 below, right? One, these people are fathers of some children, so think in those instances, they actually understand the problem their children face in their houses and they can be able to represent the voices of their children. But then secondly, we think with the anticipation of the future, because in the first place they're going to get older at the end of the day, we think they don't expect a kind of life in which they are miserable or a kind of life in which the policies don't affect them at the end of the day, right? We think we are actually creating ground in which both the old one and the younger one are represented, because first, we think these two are the focal point of the center to which this elder one and the younger one exist. At the end of the day, we are more than proud to affirm this debate. A few things of being a speech first is on the strategic flaws from opposition, right? Notice first how our world tells us that these youth are actually rational at the end of the day, right? But moreover, they again tell us that we are going to actually involve them in educational policies, right? right? We don't get the analogy why did you want to be rational in these policies at the end of the day. Because in the first place, if they're actually rational, that actually gives the guarantee that they're within this education policy, that actually go within be rational in those instances, right? But moreover, we think it's not really strategic at the end of the day for the reason as to why these people go against the nature of pen policy, right? Because first, we think they actually know that they're going to get old because you as a youth doesn't expect to work until you get old at the end of the day. So that in some way they actually get old, we think these policies of pension are going to agree to in those instances, right? Three is on the ops narrow perspective, this debate one. They actually tell us that these policies of the government, one, they are bulky, but moreover you can actually understand them, right? We clearly tell you the one, within the youth we have the elite, that the educated one at the end of the day, right? So we think they actually understand policies of the country and they can most probably understand those policies of the country and relate with them. Secondly is on the idea of these policies not impacting all the youth, right? That is to say, they actually impact the society, I mean the older one and the younger one, right? They always show you the spectrum, I mean this youth is still going through this kind of policy, right? Because first, they're actually going to get all in those instances, so the policies are still going to impact you directly or indirectly at the end of the day, right? But moreover, we think in an age whereby they actually grow from childhood first, they're actually able to understand the problems that they face from childhood, so they don't expect their children to still face this problem, right? So we think these people are most probably willing to actually bring in policies that favor the old one and those who are actually young at the end of the day. But then check, why is our case very reasonable in this debate one? It's on the idea. We think they actually have the responsibilities and the movement and some kind of the mobility that the government actually have towards them. They can actually go to the government and actually question why those decisions were made and actually influence those things, actually be changed at the end of the day. Secondly, we think youth are very most effective people to actually exist at the focal point between the elderly and the younger one, right? Because in those instances, we think they actually grew up from childhood but first understanding the problems they actually face. But then secondly, they actually go to grow old, but because of anticipation, they actually anticipate the problems that they might face in the future and make sure they bring in policies that are going to affect them or actually help them at the end of the day, right? But then off to head on responses first is on the characterization of the country, right? On the nature of how the elderly, the younger one, and the youth actually exist, right? They're able to show you that the youth become the most focal and the most important point. Why? Because first, they actually understand the problems that people face, but moreover, the vast majority of them are actually educated and they know how to actually approach this thing because they have the mechanisms on how to actually address those problems and hold government accountable for those problems. Secondly, it's on the policies that actually youth will understand. I clearly told you that youth actually have the incentive and they have the responsibilities to actually interpret these policies before they are released to the society. Also on the idea of diversity, on how the society is actually, or how this impact will affect youth at the end of the day. We clearly told you that these youth are going to actually grow old at the end of the day, but they actually expect to live in good environments that actually have policies that impact them in a very positive way at the end of the day. So we think that if those things actually exist, and because of the anticipation they have, we think it's more likely for them to buy into the idea of these policies being favorable to them at the end of the day. But also the idea of agency, right? Not just agency exists because of two things. One, because of existing crisis at the end of the day, right? We don't see the likelihood of youth actually resisting the policies that address crisis that will exist at the end of the day. Because if youth actually understand that it's a crisis, we think they will likely respond to that thing in a very quick way, right? So we think youth are still going to respond to this kind of agency in a very quick way. But moreover, we think this thing actually exists in terms of how the products are, right? Because first, if there's a crisis in the society, we think these youth still face the problem and they will actually be willing to make this policy very fast so that crisis is solved at the end of the day within the society. But also the idea of LGBT in Uganda, right? Notice one, LGBT wasn't legal in Uganda, right? So people actually used to the normal way of how sexuality exists, right? So now it's about that new policy was brought one. We think you're gonna see it as an unfavorable kind of a nature, and actually went against it, right? We think it was very significant for them one because it goes against their cultures and the narrative they already have, right? So we think it wasn't wrong that Jews actually went against that kind of narrative. We believe the problem that comes with it, we think their cultures become very significant and how they live in the past record, right? But also on the idea of policies that will actually cater for other individuals, right? Not just how we cater for this individual first. We look at this youth, some of them actually have parents, and this policy will actually expect them to actually favor the society and how this policy inherently affect the people they live with, right? In those instances, we think they actually have a good expectation of these policies actually impacting people and wouldn't want the society to still face this problem. Because when you look at the nature of youth, these are people that are probably understand the problem that people face within the society, but whatever we think they will be willing to bring in policies that favor the people look at first, these youth actually need the society to be proud of them. But in that instance, we think that motivates them to actually bring in policies that favor people within the society, right? Often the clashes and why we those clashes, right? It's on the clash of representation, right? We think their representation is a kind of narrow kind of basis of representation. Because first, we think they actually pick you to actually be part of a certain policy, or not look at how other policies they exclude you from will inherently affect them at the end of the day. Because first, we are able to show that these policies will still affect them indirectly at the end of the day. If they come actually bring in policies in terms of security, we think youth will still die at long run, and that's why they should actually be part of that, right? But when we are able to show that we actually include them in all these sectors, in all the policies, we think it's more likely for them to be represented and actually address the problem at the end of the day. Two is on the idea of impact on the youth, right? They want to show that first, this impact of these policies actually impact this youth directly, but even if they don't impact them directly, they actually impact them in some kind of a direct way, based on how the policies implemented and how it affects people within the society. We're more than proud of that.
Alright, before starting my speech, I really first want to give thanks to the adjudicating team for the time they spared since the beginning of this tournament up to now. For my opponent, it is really great to be here today. Congratulations back to my people, my patrons back there, and my coaches. Thank you for giving me such a time. It's really great. I will start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Yeah, I think that the greatest push that the team propositions is pushing to this debate is on the idea of representation, right? They keep on telling you that youth are the majority that live within the earth. So when they live, they have to be represented in politics. I think what the problem with them, they do not understand a word speech in the first place. I want told you things or policies that directly attach to youth could be able to be assessed so that youth get represented in politics. Is it to say we do not undermine the idea of representation in the first speech, but then them pushing it becomes so unreasonable or diminishing to push such kind of idea if it's already been affirmed that people or things that directly attach to youth could be assessed. This is to say things like economy as they're running, it could be assessed. Things like even education could be assessed on our side of the house. But the distinction comes in when we tell you not every policy within the government could be assessed by youth, because some other policies are designed for elderly, some other policies are designed so that to meet their needs. So this is to say in most instances youth become so rigid to an idea that they want even not to coordinate with even the elders at the first place. So how then that is a problem? It's a problem in this point that A, that youth are going to take the incentive of them going against elderly people. What we will call? It will cause what we call the intergenerational resentment instead of intergenerational justice as they stated. Why is it problematic in this side of the house? We think that people or elderly people, even if they are the minority on earth, it doesn't take the incentive or that idea of you getting the responsibility to go against their right or going against their policies that would be enforced for them. That is true in the first place, that opposition tells you that we cater for two, and that's why we think of the idea of inclusivity. But on their side of the house, they just decided to drop the idea of inclusivity because they think there's no way they can even include elderly people if they have already put policies onto government or onto youth impact assessment. Because I want told you on our side of the house we set two things at the goal. One, we'll be able to give you that idea of representation on policies that directly affect them, policies like education, policies like even things to do with economic growth that could be able to affect them at the end of the day. But even secondly, there are policies that are done in relation to elderly people or elderly lifestyle. The pension that we give them becomes problematic when they do not understand in the first place what pension wants to say or what pension award is trying to figure to you, right? I want painted for you a picture of pension in the first place. This is a pension given to elderly people when they are retiring or getting out of the government policies, right? The criticisms that come from them wasn't just enough to see that this is a problematic, because they keep on telling you that it's problematic. Youth is going to be thinking of pension that is going to come when they grow older. I don't know why would you think of things that will come in the next future. Why don't they think in the current future? These are things designed in the first place for the elderly people. Reasons as to why pensions are given to elderly people in the first place. It is seen that they were the heroes that fought for a certain country like South Sudan. These people became given something small for their life to push and for them to get out. But then you taking the incentive of going against this thing become problematic. Look at what happened in Germany in 2007 when youth protested because of pensions that were given to elders, right? They believe that in the idea is to come touch something that's going against the equality that they have. What does this look like? It's just like they are criticizing the life of these elderly people, when even they fought for the country as heroes at the end of the day, they don't want pension to be given to them. That's why we think that this thing now drives us to the idea of what they call intergenerational justice. What I see in the side of the house where they want to perceive you intergenerational justice, they say we giving youth all the point or giving them the incentive to assess all the policies in government becomes as intergenerational justice. But I think on the side of the house we view it as something like intergenerational injustice instead of justice. Why is it a problem? It is first that these people or the minority group are going to be undermined, right, on their side of the house. This brings a problematic issues to the extent that even intergenerational justice will not work. Because I told you in the first speech that things to do with intergenerational resentment will exist in the first place, so that people will even go against other people, see other people as people that are useless. So certain things become good for a life or even a community to exist with good interconnection and network among themselves. We think that people, or even considering the two within a society, become the best thing ever to fight issues to do intergenerational injustice, as they want to bring intergenerational injustice on the side of the house, right? We think that another idea is on the second idea of international of agency, right? What then do they tell you? They tell you that agencies exist because of urgent problems that exist within the status quo or within the problem currently. We think that that's become problematic when we go for assessment. First, government having such kind of agencies, they want to address a very immediate problem. Why is it problematic when people go for assessment to ask views on things like policies that are needing agency, right? It becomes problematic because it slows down the nature of how people push on, and they push with time to assess from youth to youth. This is to say, when we want to make assessment, people move from Juba to ask youth in Juba, asking youth in Bone, asking youth in Malacca, youth even in the other countries, right? That becomes problematic in the layman of such issue. What is the impact there? The problem keeps on growing, and remember it was something that needs agency to be solved in the first place. That slows down the issue, and at the end of the day, the problem grows big and bigger, causing a lot of problems, right? They told you that youth exists as the focal point. Yes, indeed we accept they exist as the focal point. But why then do you want to use them as undermining people ahead of them, right? Them being focal point doesn't give them that incentive to go against the right or even the policies of the elder people in the first place. They could be able to say what the focal mean by embarking and even assessing what these people say and how then they could help them by the side of the house. What then do they fail to understand in the critical analysis when we come back to the entire thing, right? I think the entire policy of what proposition was running is on idea of youth representation and youth getting the incentive to even participate in the parliament or even in the government. These are the things we will not reject. But what we reject is the idea of all the policies being taken to the youth assessment impact, because at the end of the day we see sense of exclusivity of elderly people not being considered. These people live just marginalized and even living their sense of living on the standard. They say youth have initiatives that are already catered for such people, right? That is really an illusion, because every youth, as they say, are people that are unrepresented. Where then do they get the capacity to do that? I'm so proud to oppose. Thank you. Okay. If that is the case and everything is said, then I will start my speech in 3, in 2, and in 1. Cheer. So that is the reason why the entire oil policy that the government makes should like be focused on them, right? Cheer. We tell you yes, we believe that youth are the majority. We tell you yes, we believe that youth are the focal point. But the problem here is that them being the majority, them being the focal point, is too bad to the extent it does not generally mean that we should actually neglect those that are actually minority. This shows you why actually proposition case is actually reckless, right? Firstly, let's take it to proposition case and I show you why it gets bad, right?
first thing when we talk of things like pension in this debate. We showed you that pension is very important for like the elder people, because these particular people are like about to retire, right? So when they retire, they use this money for their own sustainability. What did they tell you? They tell you pension indirectly affects the youth, because if pension exists, youth are like going to think of like how will they get pension in time to come and something of that kind, which affects the youth, right? I feel like that is bad. That's the reason like why they don't want pension. This is to say that what they care for is that they care for what indirectly affects the youth, but they don't care for what directly affects like the elders, right? This shows you why side opposition actually becomes more bad, because they tell you that pension is going to indirectly affect the youth, and that's why we like have to reject it, right? We tell you that pension directly affects the elders, and that is why we like don't have to like get it out in the first place. The second thing here is on how actually team proposition seems. Okay, the second thing is on clashes, right? Team proposition says that they actually have representation. Now representation, I will show you why team opposition wins it, and when it appears as a clash, we definitely win this debate, right? Chia, what does team proposition tells you? Team proposition tells you that actually these youth are the majority, and at the end of the day they are not being represented, right? So the reason why they want to subject all policies to actually youth impact assessment is because they want to carry out representation. I feel like they don't win in that, because representation is not only measured on majority, right? Even the minority that they ignore, they have to actually be represented, right? So in the event that they ignore this particular minority, this already shows you why they lose in terms of actually representation. I feel like we better solve this from side opposition, because one, we tell you that yes, these particular individuals are like the majority, but them being the majority does not just dignify that actually we need the minority, right? So this then tells you that inside opposition, the representation that we have is actually equal in the first place. But even secondly, here is on the idea of the clash of actually intergenerational justice, right? They have told you from his second speech that this side does not actually achieve intergenerational justice. Why? Because then they only focus on the majority. That means there will be a resentment within the minority and the majority as their care portrays, right? This becomes bad, because even when they look for a team proposition, that does not get to be achieved in this debate, right? I feel like team opposition better solve this, because in our side we tell you that even if like this particular people are the majority, right, we have to even show some care for those who are the minority. So here we better achieve intergenerational justice, because those who are minority as they ignore in their case, we care for them. Meanwhile, we also care for those who are the majority. Chia, before I sit down and show you why we win, the major thing that we have to be in our mind is that both sides, we don't say that we don't want this youth to actually be catered for, but what we are saying is that this country is not only for the youth, it's like for the entire people, right? So if we care only for the youth, it seems like we show recklessness for other particular people. That's the reason why I feel like this policy, team proposition just loses from their first place. And I rest my case.
Okay, I'm going to start my speech shortly in the count of 3, 2, and 1. Select panel, the only focal point or the main point of contention from team opposition is that, hey, look, you want to represent only the majority, but you don't represent the minority. The problem with this is that we don't get this kind of justification as to why this is true, because we are able to show you simply because we are saying we are trying to like subject all these policies to this youth simply does not mean we are saying we want to oppose policies, because there is no youth outside there that would want to oppose a policy that benefits their child. There is no youth outside there that would want to oppose a policy that benefits their father or another elderly. Right? We are able to show you the nature of how we define it at the end of the day. Because team opposition here clearly tries to make a diminishing analogy, trying to say, hey, look, we represent those that are specifically young or those that are the youth, but we leave out the elderly and the young. I'll show you principally why this one is not likely in our one. But first is on their definition or their characterization of what youth looks like. First, they tell us that the youth are radical people. The first thing they don't understand is what causes this radical nature. One, notice that the individuals that exist within these political systems in most instances are the old people. Even within their world, these are individuals that decide on these policies that they think are not important. But first panel, notice the nature of the importance of a policy policy is quite subjective. Because if you try and look at kind of like in places whereby these individuals are explicitly affected by things such as foreign influence, whereby some individuals are affected by things such as economic dependence, right? We think it's quite subjective for you to say in this place it's indirect, but for this place it's direct. That is why we want to make a generalization, because we look at the subjective nature of the opposition's case. Because in places like Nasir, when you talk about things such as to do with security and defense, they don't say it to be indirect. They say this to be something that is inherently important. Because we tell you, we don't draw opposition here does not draw a clear line as to what kind of case they run. Because inherently, the nature of indirect or direct is quite subjective to that individual that is affected, right? We're able to show you one, the definition